All right, we are here with Hunter Mobley. Hunter is a expert in the Enneagram. I don't know if you would call yourself that, but I would. Hunter, if you could just tell us just a little bit about yourself before we get into the Enneagram, that'd be awesome.
Absolutely. I'm as Herschel said, I'm Hunter Mobley. I'm a local Nashvilleian, and I kind of wear several hats. I'm an Enneagram teacher, and in normal times when we're not in global pandemics, I get to have the privilege of traveling the country and leading retreats and seminars and workshops on the Enneagram at churches and businesses and colleges. But also, I am a pastor and a lawyer. So I pastored in Brentwood for the past 6 years, and had kind of finished that season up in the fall of 2019. And now I'm sort of co-managing a law practice in Green Hills and Enneagram travel and teaching. So it's good to, be able to kind of dabble in all these things. And really the Enneagram is my great passion. And so I'm excited to be talking about that with you today.
Well, that's that's awesome. That's a lot on your plate. Before we get into before we get into why you're so passionate about the Enneagram, can you give us just a brief overview of what the Enneagram is?
Absolutely. So the Enneagram, it's a strange word if you've never really encountered it. It's really just a Greek word putting together Ennea, meaning 9, and gram, meaning figure. So the Enneagram is a personality system that describes 9 different personality styles. So it's not that dissimilar from some of the others that some of your folks may be interested in, like Myers-Briggs or Strength Finder or Berkman or DISC. But what kind of distinguishes the Enneagram is it is always taught with a companion faith tradition. So what I love about the Enneagram is you get to talk about personality and talk about, what personality style are you, but you talk about it so that we can actually get through the layers of personality to some deeper stuff, to our souls, or maybe as we Christians would say, the Christ in you and the Christ in me. So it's a personality system. It's got some old roots and old origins, which I think also makes it intriguing and interesting. But at the end of the day, it's describing 9 different personality styles. And the thought is everybody kind of fits into one of those 9. And that always feels a little bit reductionistic to folks sometimes at the beginning, because you think, how can the 7 billion people in the world fit into these 9 different styles? But ultimately, they're general kind of categories of ways of being. And each of us is incredibly unique based on our life experiences and our makeup. But the Enneagram just gives us some language for personality.
Well, and I would say from my experience with the Enneagram, which is very limited compared to yours, I'm sure, but the types aren't static. They're fluid.
Exactly.
And so one 9 is not going to be the exact same as another 9. Right. And one 8 is not going to be the exact same as another 8. And even somebody who's an 8, like my wife, her 8ness will vary from day to day as well.
Absolutely. It's very dynamic. There's even the idea that you move from your number toward other numbers at different moments to kind of pick up some extra behavior. So it's dynamic. It's not static. And one of the compelling things about it is, unlike some of the other personality tools, the Enneagram focuses on motivation rather than behavior. So when we kind of diagnose, our Enneagram type, we sort of talk more about kind of childhood wounds and things that motivate us, and some deeper things than just he's extroverted or she's introverted, or he always has a joke for everything, or she's real shy. We don't just talk about behavior. We talk about the things that motivate us. And so when you get to motivation, that's where you really see these numbers look very different in each person who represents them.
Why do you think the Enneagram resonates with you so much? Why has that become your passion?
One thing that I would just say as part of that answer, I love that question, is when I go teach somewhere, when I get the opportunity to present the Enneagram to folks, I like to talk about it as one tool in the toolbox. The Enneagram isn't the gospel. It's not the Bible. It's not Jesus. It's a tool. And I think we all need some tools to help us learn how to become our healthiest, authentic selves. And so my idea is, if you hear the Enneagram presented and it doesn't kind of strike you as true, or it doesn't resonate with you in some way, That's great. Go find some other tools because we all need some tools. But for me, the Enneagram, when I heard the 9 different types described, when I heard the idea that this is about motivation, not behavior, when I heard the idea that we're talking about personality, not so that personality gets big and takes over and we kind of obsess about it, but
Right.
actually so that we can get through personality to some deeper things and talk about our
Yep.
souls and talk about our deepest, most authentic selves. That was incredibly compelling to me. And I think like a lot of people, Herschel, when I heard my type described, it kind of just had the ringing of truth to it. I mean,
Yep.
I just knew it was kind of poking me and prodding me in some ways where I felt exposed. And so it just kind of in a way, I think it kind of proves itself by how resonant it is once you sort of get into it.
I remember we did a Suzanne Stabile course at our church, and on the
Yeah,
video she said, "Pay attention to when you start being offended, because that might be
exactly.
when you start to find out what
Right.
your number is and what your motivations are."
Right. The one that kind of hurts the most is
Uh-huh.
usually the best clue that that might be your personality type.
Which sounds contradictory to growth, but in my experience, it's been one of the most helpful things to be like,
Absolutely.
and especially like in my marriage with my wife, like when we're in an argument or something, I can step back and say, okay, why is this making me mad? And
Right.
look at, and like, why am I getting upset right now? And that's
Right.
one of those tools that I've learned from the Enneagram, is to ask those
Yes.
questions and say,
Mm.
okay, what is motivating this feeling that I'm having right now?
Yes.
And I think it's helped me understand her better too, because I
Mm.
can say, okay, I think this is what's going on with her right now because of my understanding of her personality type as well through it.
At the end of the day, it's a compassion oriented tool. I mean, I think when we first learn the Enneagram, our invitation is to some self compassion and kind of
Mhm.
some self understanding and figuring out maybe some pathways to growth and some pathways to just operating in our personalities in a healthier way. But
Yep.
then once we kind of wrestle with it a little bit and we learn more about it than just our own personal number, it's a compassion tool for the people that we love and the people that we live with and the people that we work with. Because most of the time, I think the Enneagram, when it's used in relationships or in workplaces, it kind of it can be disarming a little bit if you have a common set of language to just understand, why someone may be so different from you.
Yep.
I've experienced that in my church in Nashville that I pastored. When we first did the Enneagram together as a staff, there were some people that I had been having some conflict with. And just inserting this little bit of extra language through the Enneagram into our relationships gave us a way to kind of laugh at ourselves
Mm-hmm.
and almost make a joke in a healthy way about why sometimes we have a little bit of conflict. And it just built some compassion, it built some mutual understanding. And I think we need tools that build compassion and
Yep.
mutual understanding in these days.
I agree. With that said, what are some of the spiritual implications of the Enneagram?
Absolutely. So there are a lot. First of all, the way that I think about the Enneagram as a whole is, again, your personality type, which is one of the 9 numbers. It's representing a personality that you wear. And our personalities are good. They help us. They're not bad, but they're not representative of the truest, deepest parts of ourselves. You have a Christ in you, as Paul says. I have a Christ in me. There's this image of God that we bear that's mysterious, that we don't know exactly what is this image of God that we bear, but it's inside of us. We've got souls. Sometimes we don't even know how do we talk about a soul, but it's there, it's part of us. And so the Enneagram just comes in to say, if your personality takes over the day, if it's unhealthy, if it's really big, if it's what always shows up, if it's getting you into trouble, then it's blocking the way
Yep.
for you to find some access points to those deeper places. Whatever
Yep.
language you want to use for those deeper places,
Yep.
soul, Christ in you, true self, all that stuff. So our personalities can block the way if we don't have a way to see whether they're healthy or not. Another one of the spiritual indications is the 9 Enneagram types are really based around the idea that there's kind of a core sin or passion that's associated with each type that kind of trips us up most. And they turn out to be the 7 deadly sins plus two,
Hmm.
plus fear and deceit. And so, again, it's useful in the Christian faith, I think, to just be able to have some sense of, what is the sin? What's the passion? What's the
Yep.
thing that kind of I can stumble around the most? And let me give some language to it. Let me look at it. Let me see how I might build some healthier pathways around that core sin or passion, and actually embrace what the Enneagram teaches is the virtue for each
Yep.
number. And the virtue for each number is really representative, I think, of the image of God inside each of us.
Mm, that's beautiful. Um, so let's say you have somebody who's completely new to this,
Yeah.
doesn't really know anything. Uh, how do you get them started? What's the starting point for this?
Absolutely. So, first of all, I'd say the starting point, the best starting point is not an online quiz or test. And it's not because those are bad. If you've done one, sometimes those can be helpful. But the reason why I say that is because the Enneagram is an old tool that historically was always taught in kind of more of a narrative tradition. So the best way to get it is not to have an assessment tell you what you are. The best way to get it is to either listen to a description of all the 9 types or read a long form description of all 9 types and self-identify, because I think that gives you some kind of dignity and some skin in the game in the process. There's not just an output that says, okay, you're a 5, you're a 2, you're a 4. You're kind of invited into a process of self-discovery. So there's some really great, one day hopefully we can do workshops again
Right.
and you can come and we can talk about it. But there are some great books. The Road Back to You by Ian Cron and Suzanne Stabile is a great entry point. There are some great kind of, online long form teachings, some good podcasts, but I would say find some way to get it in a narrative form where you can hear something about all 9 types,
Yep.
and then you can see which one kind of fits me the best.
Mm-hmm. So you have someone who is starting out on this journey who doesn't know a whole lot. What encouragement would you give them as they're gonna probably learn some stuff about themselves that they don't necessarily like?
Absolutely. So the first thing I would say is, unfortunately, as humans, I think part of being human is that we know ourselves more by what we get wrong than by what we get right.
Mm.
That's just one of the interesting mysteries of being human. So when you hear the Enneagram described for the first time, a lot of times you really hear a lot of stuff about your number that feels really negative, like feels like problems or feels like pathology. Sometimes I have people come out of Enneagram seminars and they're like, is this a disease that I'm this number? And the answer is no. And so just know when you first hear
Maybe
it,
it is.
yeah, maybe. But when you first hear it, you're going to kind of hear the stuff that maybe kind of pokes a little bit, maybe feels a little bit like not the best part of you, but some of the parts of you that feel unfinished or feel in progress. And so what I say is keep going, because as you get deeper into the Enneagram, you realize that the best part of us is the worst part, and the worst part is the best part. There's kind of a both and in it all. And so the Enneagram is dynamic, it's not static. So the news is we don't have to stay stuck in living in our personalities exactly the way we live in them today. So hopefully, when you first hear it, you realize, wow, I mean, there's some ways in which my personality kind of keeps getting me into trouble. I keep getting into the same habitual things. I'm a 2. So as 2s, we're helpers, we're givers. That sounds great. But when I first learned about the Enneagram, what I hear is I keep giving so that other people will appreciate me, so that I'll feel loved. And I realized,
Mhm.
okay, this is kind of getting me into trouble in some ways. So, but the Enneagram gives us pathways if you keep going for how can I get through some of those habitual episodic patterns of unhealthy behavior and get to some of the deeper stuff. As a 2, I can get to the virtue, which is humility, and I can lean into that and figure out how to clothe myself with humility, maybe as the Bible says, a little bit more. So keep going, but know that in the early days, it does feel like you resonate some with maybe the worst parts of your
Mm.
number. And that's sometimes how it's presented. You know, Suzanne Stabile and I, who I mentioned earlier, she's a great Enneagram teacher. She and I work together and um, in her ministry center in Dallas. And she talked about a few years ago, she did an Enneagram seminar where she thought, I'm going to just teach each number by giving the healthiest articulation of that number and only talking about the best pieces of it. And so she taught this group of folks and everybody loved it. They had a great day. They thought it was so engaging and nobody discovered their number.
Right.
And so, you know, we just realized we know ourselves a little bit more by what we get wrong than what we get right. But there's deeper stuff on the other side of that. Keep going.
Well, and my experience is it's the hard stuff that was so transformative. I don't know if you're familiar with the band Sleeping at Last and their Enneagram album. Have you? I'm assuming you've heard that.
Yes.
I mean, it's one of the most beautiful albums I've ever heard. Any album I've ever heard. But I remember particularly, you know, I'm a 9, and I had just heard about this album, and I was driving through Cool Springs, and I was like, "Oh, I'm going to put this on. I haven't listened to it yet." And I'm like, "Well, I'm a 9. Let's put on number 9 first." And I had to pull over into a parking lot because I was wrecked by. There's a line in that song in particular. It says, "I've been less than half myself for more than half my life," and that was one of the most true things I'd ever heard about myself. And it's from that, you know, that lesson about 9s, about how we put things off because we're so afraid of going forward. And I had that was that was a transformative moment in my life, and it came from the Enneagram. And my hope is that people will listen to this and will be like, okay, I want to learn more about myself. You know, I want to see how I can be better.
I agree, because my real belief is that if we don't have some language for personality, some tools like this, that we just spend too much of our lives stuck in old habits, old patterns, old ways of being that kind of keep getting us in the same kind of trouble over and over in relationships and in our own life. And so I agree. I think diving into the Enneagram is a way to say, I want to grow. You know, I don't believe that I'm static. I believe that I'm dynamic. I believe that I can be different in some ways. I believe I can see transformation. And so I think that's what's really compelling and exciting about it.
Yeah. Well, I know that whenever this pandemic ends, we're supposed to be doing some sort of conference with you at the church.
We are.
Lord knows when that will
right
be.
At Brentwood. I know we're gonna hopefully have a whole Saturday together where we can talk about all the 9 types.
Yes.
And get started. So I'm praying that day comes quickly.
We will get that info out as soon as we can actually do that. But until then, where can we find you on social media?
Absolutely.
Whatever? Where can we find you?
Thank you. So I'm on Facebook and Instagram as Enneagram Hunter. Okay. And so just Enneagram Hunter, real easy to find.
And I'll put it here on the screen too.
Thank you. I post a video on every Wednesday on Facebook that's kind of a 10-minute, you know, just Enneagram topic for the day. So that's a fun way that you can kind of jump in. Also got a website, enneagramhunter.com, and you can kind of track where I am, what I'm doing there. I'd love to hear from you. And I'd love to come maybe to your business or community or small group and get to talk about this tool with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us this week. And we look forward to the day when we can finally do one of those conferences in person.
Absolutely. Thank you, Herschel. It's been fun.
Thank you so much.